Hey everybody, this is the roundup for every Green Lantern thing that was either released or announced in the month of September 2021. This month gave us Green Lantern number 6, and I won't lie, I didn't really like it. And that's a first for this run. If you've been following my content, you know how much fun I've been having with the current storyline, and this is the first issue so far that really didn't land for me. If you want to hear me complain about this issue, go watch my video. If you want to hear me complain about it again, but with other people this time, go listen to episode 451 of the Lantern Cast. Also, I should mention that according to my Comixology subscription, Green Lantern number 7 has been delayed from October 5th to October 19th. So we'll have to wait an additional 2 weeks to see the next chapter of this story. This isn't too surprising, as a number of comics have started to have their releases impacted by COVID-related delays in both shipping and supply lines, so don't be surprised if more of the books you read don't hit their scheduled release dates. It's pretty much out of their hands at this point. Ironically, a delay saved this month for me, since we got a second issue of Green Lantern. More specifically, this month gave us the Green Lantern 2021 Annual number 1, which I really enjoyed. This issue directly continues the Jessica Cruz story that began in Future State Green Lantern number 1, and follows her journey to better understand fear as she tries to use a yellow ring as a member of the Sinestro Corps. This book has a really unique spin on what the power of fear can actually achieve when in the right hands, and it's the kind of idea that I really want to see explored more going forward. Speaking of Jessica, we finally got our hands on Unearthed, a Jessica Cruz story, a young adult original graphic novel that reimagines Jessica as a teenager at the center of an undocumented immigrant family, and the flood of emotions that come from knowing how quickly everything in your life could change for the worst. This book absolutely won't be for everybody, which is fine, because it was never meant to be for everybody. It's specifically to get kids between the ages of 12 and 18 to think about these topics, and attaching a known superhero brand to it ensures that more people will read this book, which I think is a good thing, because the sooner we get kids thinking about this kind of stuff, the more likely they'll grow up into adults who can help do something about it. Justice League Last Ride number 5 showed us what happens when Hal Jordan is the last man standing between Darkseid and the power of the Central Battery on Oa, and it ends in a way that I didn't see coming. I'd kind of love to see everyone's reaction to what Hal does at the end of this issue, especially right now. Infinite Frontier number 6 ended a miniseries that turned out to be a whole lot of setup for the real event coming next year, but it did have a surprisingly large number of Lantern characters that haven't seen the spotlight in a very long time. I came out of this book with way more questions than answers, but I can't deny that it's great to see DC use characters like Alan Scott, Jade, and Obsidian as part of a story that's going to be central to the DC universe going forward. I only hope that they stay just as big a part of it when the actual event starts up next year. That's everything that came out this month, so let's look ahead to what's coming in December. Green Lantern number 9 races towards the conclusion of this arc as both John and Joe seem to find the answers they were after, and have to deal with what they mean for everyone. Hal Jordan is back in the Justice League as of the Justice League 2021 Annual number 1. He's also been all over the variant covers to DC vs. Vampires, so either he's turning into a vampire himself or just fighting other heroes who have. Either way, it's Hal vs. Wonder Woman on the cover of DC vs. Vampires number 3. Human Target number 3 is going to continue its story of a retro 80s whodunit through the lens of the Justice League International by bringing in some explosive relationship drama with Guy Gardner and Ice. And now this one surprised me. Catwoman Lonely City number 2 has 3 covers, all of which contain Green Lantern imagery. One cover has Catwoman holding something glowing green in her left hand, another cover has Alan Scott's ring front and center, and the third cover has some kid playing video games wearing a Green Lantern emblem shirt. I read the solicitations for this issue and the first issue, and nothing talks about Green Lantern at all, though the story it's telling seems to center around what Gotham becomes after the likes of Batman, Joker, Gordon, and Nightwing are all gone forever, so maybe it makes sense to bring in the legacy of Alan Scott. If you didn't know, Green Lantern was the hero of Gotham back when Bruce Wayne's dad was a kid, so it makes sense to wrap that into a story about how heroic legacies have shaped the city over time. Either way, this is a very convenient excuse to read a 4-issue Black Label series by Cliff Chiang. Now on to the world of statues and figures, because Green Lantern had 2 new ones announced this month. The first is Kyle Rayner by XM Studios, featuring a very nice sculpt of Kyle firing missiles while sitting on top of a giant mech. This is a 1/4 scale statue, which means it's going to be a lot bigger than the 1/6 scale Hal Jordan and Jessica Cruz statues that XM made prior to this, and it's going to have a much larger price tag. This thing is over $1,000, and it hurts my soul. Fortunately, I can feel a lot better about buying one of these limited edition vinyl soda Green Lantern figures for about 15 bucks. It's a very charming, cartoony sculpt of Hal Jordan that's a little over 4 inches tall and comes packed in this custom soda can. There's also a chase variant of White Lantern Hal packed into some random cans, which I think also looks super nice. And hey, they actually thought to have him holding his battery, something that isn't nearly common enough among Green Lantern figures and statues. And to close out this month, a handful of writers have been talking about current Green Lantern projects, upcoming Green Lantern projects, and Green Lantern projects that almost happened. First up is Geoffrey Thorne, writer of the current ongoing Green Lantern book. He started doing a series of annotated breakdowns of his run issue by issue over on his Patreon page. It's not behind a paywall or anything like that, and it contains some pretty interesting insight into what's happening in the book right now, as well as places the story might go in the future. So if you're like me and you're really into theory crafting, or you just like to peek behind the curtain and see why certain decisions are made, this is worth taking a look at. Over on Twitter, Brian Michael Bendis has teased the return of the Gold Lantern. And by teased, I mean he retweeted a Gold Lantern collage by a Legion of Superheroes fan account and used the hashtags Long Live the Legion, Coming Soon, and Legion Teasin'. Unless I've missed something in one of the other books Bendis writes, we haven't seen Kala Lore, aka the Gold Lantern, since the most recent Legion book disappeared after Future State. And I have a feeling the reason for that is because one of the last things that book did was overtly foreshadow the coming of the Great Darkness, which at the time was thought to just be a reference to the Great Darkness Saga, one of the most popular Legion stories of all time that focus on the Legion vs. Darkseid. But then the Infinite Frontier miniseries set up a story about Darkseid's quest to control a force called the Great Darkness, which will tie into DC's next big event in 2022. So if I had to guess, I'd say that we'll probably see Bendis' Legion come back in a big way next year, in time to play a role in DC's big event, with the first hints of their return coming in the Justice League 2021 Annual, which is supposed to set up a storyline about the Justice League versus the Legion of Superheroes. Guess this is a good time for me to get caught up on the Justice League. There was a massive oral history of the New 52 posted on Polygon that I highly recommend everyone take the time to read, because they managed to get writers and editors like Dan DiDio and Scott Snyder, just to name a few, to talk pretty candidly about what went on behind the scenes to make the New 52 happen. It's a fascinating read, because it really conveys the passion that went into this overly ambitious project, while also being extremely critical about the mistakes they made along the way. And you might just learn something that gives new context to your favorite books from that era of DC. The part most relevant to our purposes here is that writer Paul Cornell originally pitched his Demon Knights series to be a sort of medieval Justice League, using legacy characters that could have reasonably extended that far back into history. A version of Hawkman and Hawkwoman would have been there, a champion of Shazam would have been there, and a stranded Green Lantern. That right there is an interesting wild card, because it doesn't sound like it would have been some kind of medieval Green Lantern, but a member of the Green Lantern Corps stuck on Earth during medieval times. I love the idea of spotlighting a random member of the Corps like that, and the idea of them just straight up being a science fiction character trapped in a medieval fantasy story sounds like it could be a lot of fun, especially if they're an alien in a world that only knows demons and monsters. But that didn't get to happen, since an overall lack of planning and coordination between different projects meant that Paul Cornell didn't get access to characters from other franchises like he wanted, so Demon Knights basically became an Etrigan book, which is fine, but it's still only a fraction of what it could have been. Lastly, and this one hurts the most, we almost got a Green Lantern horror series written by Jeff Lemire. Apparently DC was planning to launch a whole horror line as part of their 5G initiative, with Lemire's Green Lantern as the flagship title. But based on the way he talks about it, the same internal strife that did away with 5G also killed his desire to work on the project, or work at DC in general for that matter. And this is a really big loss for us fans, because this book would have combined two things Jeff Lemire is really good at writing: horror and Green Lantern. You might remember that we've actually talked about Jeff Lemire's Green Lantern on this channel before. Back during Dark Knight's Death Metal, there was an anthology called The Last Stories of the DC Universe, where Lemire wrote a story called Last Nights, about Hal Jordan and Sinestro meeting up the night before the final battle. It was a really good story that proved Jeff Lemire understands these characters, and the kinds of meaningful moments that they can have when the weight of their shared history comes to bear in the face of an uncertain future. Now combine that with the last horror book he did for DC, his run on Animal Man during the New 52, a fascinatingly unsettling story about a superhero and his family being swept up in a supernatural series of events far bigger and more terrifying than anything they'd ever imagined, all while aligning perfectly with what was going on in another DC horror book, Swamp Thing by Scott Snyder. Basically what I'm saying is that this project had the potential to be the perfect combination of elements to give us an amazing story, but it never ended up happening. I can only hope that breaking away from DC means that Jeff Lemire will be willing to talk openly about the project, because I'll always be curious about what might have been. So that's the Green Lantern Roundup for September 2021. If you have something to say about any of these topics, or if there's anything you think I missed, let's keep the conversation going in the comments section down below. You can usually find me reacting to these developments in real time on Twitter, and I'll be back doing another one of these videos a month from now. So subscribe and hit the bell to make sure you're notified when that video drops. Until then, thank you for taking the time to watch. My name is Dan, we'll talk again soon.